This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello everyone, it's SHERI Horn Hasan from Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking, and I'm coming to you on November 25th, 2021 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. First, before I launch into this week's Astro news, you can use my usual housekeeping stuff. You can listen to Karmic Evolutions Astrologically Speaking anytime by simply going to my website, karmicevolution.com, and clicking on the banner labeled Radio Show. From there, you can scroll down the page and hear the most recent show, either live or recorded, and or search the archive listing for past shows that you may have missed or that you would like to listen to again. Separately, you can follow me on my Facebook page, which is Karmic Evolution for Your Soul, and it's there that you can sign up for my Conversations About Consciousness newsletter as well. And finally, once again, I am still offering my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for listeners for only $99. And this is a reading for those who would like a delineation of their natal chart in order to gain greater consciousness about your soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime, to help you to move from chaos to clarity in areas of interest related to your relationships, your career, your finances, and or your health, and also to heal old karmic wounds and co-create your own future happiness and success. So if you'd like to awaken to your true potential and highest destiny in this lifetime, that's easy when you take advantage of my special discounted offer for listeners only, a 1-hour Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $99. If interested, simply email me at SHERI, that's SHERI, at karmicevolution.com, and we'll get your reading booked today. At almost half the regular price, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. Okay, so let's get right into this week's Astro news you can use. We are in the waning phase of the monthly lunar cycle since last week's Taurus Full Moon lunar eclipse, which occurred at 27 degrees and 14 minutes of the Taurus-Scorpio polarity on November 19th. Now, since then, the Sun and Mercury have both moved into Sagittarius, the Sun on November 21st and Mercury on the 24th, respectively, and the two will meet up on November 28th. Now, more about that in a few. But first, as I am wont to do, I'd like to review the effects of the lunar eclipse, now almost a week old, and in a phase where we're still releasing. And I mentioned on last week's show that the energy of this lunar eclipse really centered around where and what we may all discover, or what has been discovered that was previously hidden to us during the few weeks leading up to and at this exact lunation. In other words, what's come to light that had previously been eclipsed in our lives. And the nature of this discovery will be revealed through the realm of the houses in which the Taurus moon and Scorpio sun fell, as these show the areas of life most affected and through which any previously unknown information has arisen and or is arising still now, the result of which we want to release, which I'll get into in a minute. Now, not to beat a dead horse, but I'd mentioned last week also, and I know last week was a repeat from the week before, so I'm not trying to inundate people with the same information, but I'd mentioned the revelation around the prominent Green Bay Packers football player, Aaron Rodgers, and that he had lied. It was discovered that he lied, and this was about 3 weeks before the actual eclipse. I had mentioned that oftentimes, according to Bill Meridian, a very well-known astrologer, the themes of an eclipse begin to emerge about 3 weeks before. So we found out within a couple weeks before the Taurus Full Moon lunar eclipse that Aaron Rodgers had lied about being vaccinated for COVID-19, and how it was subsequently also revealed that both the team and the NFL knew he'd lied and yet let him continue to play. Now, I mentioned also the deeper meaning of this revelation, which covered quite a bit of territory having to do with the scorpionic themes of money and manipulation and control, and that these include the fact that the NFL has historically hidden more than just one piece of information about one particular player or team. So first, why did the NFL hide the fact that Rodgers wasn't vaccinated and let him lie by saying he'd been immunized, meaning he was using, some kind of holistic remedies to avoid the virus, and then only disclose that they knew after it was announced that he'd caught COVID or succumbed to the infection? I mean, fortunately, he's recovered and he's playing again. I saw. I don't know. My brother watches sports, so I saw him on TV this past weekend or whenever. So I know that he's alive and well. But in any case, the answer to the question, I think, is pretty obvious. And the answer is money. So when we look deeper, we also see that the NFL's lied about other health-related issues over the years. And I mentioned this in previous shows too, the most important of which relates to the league's refusal to entertain seriously the existence of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, which is a kind of traumatic brain injury suffered by many of its players and which often may not show up until years after retirement. Now, CTE causes mood lability, or violent mood swings, and Alzheimer's, according to the research. Many of us are not unfamiliar with many stories about professional athletes, particularly football players, boxers, or others who sustain not infrequent injuries to the head that have caused them to perpetuate, I guess is the right word, violent acts. I remember that video of one of I believe he was a football player. I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure he's a football player, in an elevator where the security cameras caught him, punching or beating up his girlfriend and then dragging her out of the, Now, whether his problem was CTE or not, I don't know, but I'm saying that that's the kind of thing or actions that can happen when one experiences intense mood lability. Because mood lability is 1 minute you could be laughing and the next minute you could be punching somebody out, or screaming or whatever. So apparently CTE, when you're diagnosed with it, this is not controllable. But anyway, for years, the NFL disputed that playing professional football could result in CTE. And the league went so far as to try to contradict ongoing scientific studies throughout the 2000s with its own, and I'm quoting here, shoddy mild traumatic brain injury committee studies. So in other words, they did studies that were sort of like baby studies, where they said, oh no, it's not, serious, it's not chronic, it's not traumatic to the degree where it causes swelling of the brain. It's mild. And so that was reported very much in the press 10, 15 years ago. and that in engaging in these shoddy studies, they aim to counter mounting evidence that repeated blows to the head cause long-term cognitive and neurological dysfunction. I looked it up and I realized that the NFL only acknowledged the link between football playing and CTE for the first time somewhere around 2016. So the second issue I mentioned that surfaced more starkly into consciousness, and again, I'm repeating from last week, but I really do think it's very important for us to look at this all from the collective point of view, how we are all absorbing the energies that we see playing out in the collective. And this stark consciousness was raised for all of us during the Rogers fiasco, leading up to the Taurus Full Moon lunar eclipse on November 19th, and that was surrounding the issues of Big Pharma. And the irony here was that a well-known football player defied the mandate of his league to get vaccinated and revealed that he did not do so because he did not trust the vaccine. Now, of course, this happened at a time when many in this country and around the world are proclaiming that they don't trust the actual medicine. And this my body, my choice stance, taken by many worldwide at this point, highlights today's distrust built up over years, during which both the medical sorry, hang on, I'm misspeaking. I'm trying to say that a lot of people who refuse the vaccine are using my body, my choice as a rationalization, and that some of that, or much of it, is because it's a reflection of how much they distrust the medical and the scientific communities, and that when we look at the pharmaceutical industry's culpability for things like the opioid crisis in this country, which is now, I don't even know how many years old, but they're still trying some of these cases in court around whether or not these companies are responsible, whether or not the doctors are responsible for overprescribing opioids. And yesterday, I think I saw a piece in the news about cases against the major pharmacies, the chain pharmacies like CVS and Walgreens and some of the others that dispensed the opioids. So it's very interesting if you drill down and go down that rabbit hole. But my major point is that we all essentially thinking, people have the right to distrust the pharmaceutical industry because they addicted people and killed a lot of people, right? So where the actual buck stops and where the actual blame all lies is still under discussion. We all have our own opinions on that. However, these cases are coming, to the courts and all that. But again, why would we mistrust Big Pharma? Duh, right? So my personal belief is that this particular Taurus full moon lunar eclipse, and by the way, I mistakenly referred last week and the week before to this eclipse as total, but this was actually only a partial eclipse, although it was very close to total. I think it was 97% or something like that, but it couldn't be classified as total. Because it highlighted the Scorpio-Taurus axis, had a great deal to do with allowing us to release or, free ourselves from all of these manipulations, lies, and power controls related to money, read Scorpio, and our most precious resource, which is that of our bodies, and that's Taurus. That's the Taurus archetype. The Taurus archetype revolves around pleasure. What we like and what we value is what gives us pleasure. And the way that we determine what gives us pleasure is through our 5 physical senses. So, I think this is interesting because I'm mindful of the fact that we're headed toward the U.S. Pluto return, which is when we use the Sibley chart as the birth chart of the U.S., which many astrologers do. There's controversy, and there's astrologers who have slightly different dates and different times based on history, etc., etc. But a majority of astrologers do use the July 4th, 1776 at 5:10 p.m. in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania chart. And the Pluto return for that chart will occur at 27 degrees and 33 minutes of Capricorn, circa February 20th of 2022. It's within that day or two. So now Pluto moves slowly and can retrograde over a particular specific degree between 3 and 5 times before its influence on that degree begins to wane. So in this case, Pluto will once again hit its U.S. natal degree, first on February 20th, 2022, and then again hang on a second. Yeah, the natal degree, just so you know, is 27 degrees, 33 minutes of Capricorn, and it'll hit it the second time during its retrograde on July 11th of 2022. And then when Pluto is direct again on December 28th of 2022. So we automatically see already that the Pluto return is not one day, all right? That's the entire year of 2022, and we're still in 2021. But not only that, Pluto will again come within a degree of its natal Pluto while retrograde on August 16th, 2023. And the last hit will be within 20 minutes when Pluto stations direct at 27:53 minutes on October 10th of 2023. So we're gearing up for the Pluto return in a couple of short months, but from where we are now at almost the end of November, we can see the whole entire return is going to take a good 2 years. And I'd like to remind everyone of the comments made by one of my guests, one of my favorite guests, astrologer Mitchell Lewis, on this show, when he noted that Pluto is like an infection or representative of infection that's been lying hidden and festering under the surface, right? And only when the infection becomes apparent, I think he likened it to a boil, you know, when you lacerate the boil, I hate to say this and use this language, but the pus comes out, right? And it's only then that you can clean the wound and allow it to heal, or apply the proper medicine to allow it to heal. Now, since Pluto represents our shadow side, and when we look at it collectively, the shadow side of collective unconscious, we begin to, become aware that at this Pluto return, what's being revealed or brought to light is and will be all that's rotten about this nation. Now, I don't say that to sound un-American. Far from it. Okay? Rather than acknowledging that there's a lot about this nation. Oh, I mention it rather to acknowledge that there's a lot about this nation since its founding that has been submerged or not dealt with in the course of its evolution over its near 250-year existence. And we know that race represents one of these issues. Slavery is a premise upon which this nation was built, a fact that many of us do know, but many of us have also ignored. The all men are created equal never included anyone but white males, meaning if you're of another race, color, creed, never mind female, you are most definitely not considered equal at this nation's origin. And the second issue, which is so loudly and clearly represented by the fact that it's a Pluto return, is that of money. Now, landholders formed our original congressional representatives, particularly in the U.S. Senate. You had more influence, held more sway in terms of writing, devising, and passing laws in this country if you were a gentried landholder, read moneyed originally. So this ultimately created the rift between the North and the South over issues like slavery that led to the Civil War. But I'd also mention that one of the things that's been hidden, and this has a lot to do with critical race theory, and I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but I'm trying to illustrate the bigger picture here of this Pluto return. And I guess I go with the flow here, because this is what's been coming up for me, and that's what I decided to talk about today. So the rift between the North and the South, which also occurred at approximately the Neptune half return. So when the natal Neptune in the Americas chart came to about 165 years and opposed itself by transit, the Civil War broke out. We're in that period again now. So I'm not going to go into the specifics of that, but what I'm trying to say is that there was the rift, which we all know about because we studied it and, we know about history. But that the North, even though all of the blame goes to the South, the North was not blameless because many of the northern states out of our original 13 colonies also were complicit in the economics of slavery. And that's because theirs were some of the ports through which the slaves were brought in and entered this country for the purpose of enhancing the economy of southern plantation owners and others. So New York, for example, if you investigate the history, New York was very much a corporate town. It isn't known for being prejudiced in the sense that most people didn't have slaves in New York, but it did facilitate, like I said, the importation of slaves, the selling of slaves at market, as did many of the northern states above the Mason-Dixon line. So, they aided and abetted enhancing the economy of southern plantation owners, like I said. And as these plantation owners, many of whom were what I would call mid or lower level European aristocrats, and by that I mean they were the second, the third, the fourth, or the fifth sons of the aristocracy from places like Britain, France, and Spain, the major European nations, who were never going to inherit their father's wealth because that always went to the eldest son. So they came to America to make their fortunes instead. And it was many of these men who were given the huge tracts of land to cultivate and farm as an enticement by the crowns of their original nation. So the British monarchy, the French monarchy, the Spanish monarchy, right? Go over and populate and, you'll be paying us taxes and we will reap the benefits, but you can have the land. So these people became landowners whose wealth grew based on their dependency on free, read, slave labor. And some of these people had a hand in making the laws of our nation through our Senate. So we see in the recent Taurus Full Moon lunar eclipse, which pitted the Taurus moon against the Scorpio sun, the energy of the Taurus moon. And Taurus is related to our resources. It rules, Venus's Taurus rules the second house in our natal charts, by the natural second house in everybody's chart. And that's related to resources such as land and money, things of value. And Taurus is primarily about the energy or archetypal energy of peace, calm, and serenity in the physical natural world. So at this lunation, which also happened to be a lunar eclipse, we find the Taurus moon crying out for the Scorpio sun to release some of its vices, including that of holding power over others through things related to wealth, literal wealth, and wealth in the form of resources such as land. So if we marry this more fleeting lunation's energy, and although eclipses effects can last from a couple of months to a couple of years, depending, and I mentioned that in my last show as well. If we marry this eclipse's energy to the upcoming U.S. Pluto return, we can begin to see that what's been festering underneath since the formation of this nation included the inherent notion of inequality and the nation's rulership by the moneyed classes, which has begun to rise to the surface as the infection, or boil, as Mitchell Lewis has called it, begins to burst into full view. And as I mentioned before, as anyone with, as with any wound, it has to be aired, it has to be cleansed, it has to be acknowledged, right, and then dealt with, cleansed and healed. And what's going on for this nation currently, as these energies continue to build in the period leading up to the Pluto return, is one in which the infection has to rise into consciousness in a much bigger way or on a much grander scale. So politically, we can see that money rules. As we know, especially since the Supreme Court's upholding of Citizens United in 2010, which opened the door to massive amounts of dark money or funding that comes from undisclosed sources like political action committees and lobbyists and the like, that such funding does not serve the purpose of a good percentage of this nation's population. Rather, it serves to enrich only the few, a fact that's really not in dispute, as financial and economic equality has risen steadily between the 1970s and the Reagan years during the 80s and now. So let's go back to the Sun and Mercury's ingress into the sign of Sagittarius on November 21st and 23rd, respectively. While the day of the November 19th lunar eclipse brought us a very heavily politicized jury verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, Jupiter ruled, let's remember, Jupiter ruled Sagittarius comprises the archetypal energy, among other things, of higher law. We've seen the split between the right and the left with stark clarity, if we hadn't already noticed it before. I mean, again, this has been building for a long time. The plutonic boil didn't just happen overnight and come to a head. It's been building for 250 years. Now, to get back to the Rittenhouse trial, obviously some hail Rittenhouse as a hero, while others decry him, his not guilty on all counts verdict, as a culmination of white privilege. Again, something, the part of the systemic rot of this nation. Clearly, had he been a color of person, I don't think anyone can argue that he would have been acquitted of murdering two individuals and severely wounding another while parading around with an AR-15 rifle obtained illegally and done so on, or been successful doing so on the plea or argument of self-defense. Now, this trial also highlights the issue of gun ownership under the Second Amendment, something else that we're going back to in terms of the early years of the formation of this nation. And the Second Amendment, as we know, is one of the ways that the gun lobby in this nation has succeeded stupendously in influencing the lack of serious gun laws here. And this, in turn, has allowed the proliferation of military-style weaponry throughout our nation, and the most egregious repercussions have been seen in our schools and around mass shootings at large events that have killed the innocent, but ended up protecting, as in this case, in the Rittenhouse trial, some of the killers. Now, I wanted to mention also that at the lunation, of course, we had the Mars opposite Uranus, Mars and Scorpio opposite Uranus, and a lot of stuff that has happened since, like the terrible tragedy of this guy driving his red SUV through the crowd at a Christmas holiday parade in Wisconsin. I know I don't properly pronounce the name of the town, but it's Waukesha, I think it is, or Waukesha, I'm not sure, in Wisconsin. So there's an irony there because Kenosha, Wisconsin is where the Rittenhouse crimes were committed and where the trial occurred. We've had that and a few other things that have occurred where there's been sudden actions that have been violent that have resulted in deaths. So the lunation, leading into the lunation, that energy was waxing. And as it was waning, we've still had other incidents that display this what do you call it? These archetypal energies of explosion or rapid movement, or that results in injury or death, right? Or explosions, that kind of thing. Now, the sun is in Sagittarius until December 21st, and Mercury is there until December 13th, which happens to be the day Mars enters Sagittarius. And the heavy Sagittarius theme, which I mentioned before, has to do with law, has to do with travel, has to do with higher education, has to do with foreign cultures and people, and as well as religion. But in terms of the legal connotation, we're beginning to see a number of jury verdicts come down in cases related to these Pluto-ruled issues around the kind of garbage or rot that needs to come to the surface during the Pluto return, or has been slowly coming to the coming to the surface, but hasn't been seen in quite the same light, right? It's all piecemeal the way we deal with it. But the culmination of it coming to the surface now and the beginning of the period where it needs to be exercised and healed. We're in this interim period right now. And first we had the recent jury verdict against the Unite the Right group, which marched in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2007, that just awarded hefty financial sums to the plaintiffs. Now, many of us remember how back then President Trump had said there were, quote, good people on both sides, despite the fact that these march organizers and participants were basically anti-Semitic white nationalists who believed, or white supremacists who believed this country belongs only to their ilk and no one else. Well, the jury just assessed financial penalties of $500,000 to each of the 12 defendants and $1 million penalties to their 5 organizations. Or, as NBC News put it, and here I'm going to quote, 9 people injured during the 2017 Unite the Right rally in downtown Charlottesville, Virginia, are entitled to more than $25 million in financial compensation, a jury declared Tuesday in reaching a partial verdict. But it could not agree on the most serious claims that the defendants, about 24 white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and key organizers, engaged in a conspiracy to commit violence under federal law. The jury of 11 deliberated for more than 3 days following 4 weeks of testimony in the civil trial in a federal court in Charlottesville. The plaintiffs, all from Charlottesville, described broken bones, the bloodshed and emotional trauma resulting from mayhem, and the defendants, some self-described racists and white nationalists, argued they were exercising their First Amendment rights in organizing and participating in the rally. Now, again, I just want to interject, we're seeing the negative side of the Constitution come to the forefront in ways that I think are kind of culminating. The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 25th Amendment, you know what I mean, over these past couple of years. And, cases like the one I mentioned, Citizens United, which basically equates a corporation or a political action committee's money to that of an individual, meaning they are considered equivalent. If I give my candidate $5,000 and a political action committee gives $5 million, they're considered to be equal. And that just doesn't work, obviously the moneyed classes get or hold more sway. Now, just to go back to quoting this article, the case known as Sines versus Kessler was the first major lawsuit in years to be tried under the so-called Ku Klux Klan Act, a rarely used federal law codified after the Civil War. Another reminiscence now to the fact that Neptune is opposing Neptune. We're harking back to the post-Civil War period. which we're not quite in yet, but it's a reminder. It was installed to diminish the power of white supremacists and protect African Americans, prohibiting discrimination in voting and other rights. And I'm still quoting here. In making its decision, the jury had to find that the defendants, who include Jason Kessler, the lead organizer of the rally, and Richard Spencer, which person many of us heard about at that time, a white nationalist who coined the term alt-right, entered into conspiracy to commit violence. But the jury was deadlocked in the first two claims of a federal race-based conspiracy to interfere with civil rights and action for neglect to prevent. On the claim that the defendants violated Virginia's civil conspiracy law, the jury awarded $500,000 in punitive damages against all 12 individual defendants, including Kessler and Spencer, and $1 million against 5 white nationalist organizations. Now, news reports subsequent to this verdict have quoted some of the lawyers for the plaintiffs as happy that the jury awarded such high financial penalties, claiming that this will bankrupt these right-wing organizations and bring an end to their nationwide or even international influence. Some in the legal community now note that bankrupting these individuals and organizations is kind of good enough, and that they may decide, the lawyers in the case may decide not to pursue the charges related to a federal race-based conspiracy to interfere with civil rights on which the jury deadlocked. And now, just as I was just before I began to record the show, and in the interest of full disclosure, I'm recording today's podcast on Wednesday, November 24th, for broadcast on Thursday, November 25th, because of the Thanksgiving holiday. And just before, as I said, beginning the recording, I saw the news that the Arbery case jury had returned a verdict of guilty. And again, according to the New York Times, and I'm going to quote again, 3 white men were found guilty of murder and other charges on Wednesday for the pursuit and fatal shooting of Ahmaud Arbery, a 25-year-old black man, in a case that, together with the killing of George Floyd, helped inspire the racial justice protests of last year. And let's remember that the case in Wisconsin against Rittenhouse was sparked because Rittenhouse went to a Black Lives Matter protest in Kenosha, Wisconsin, that was objecting to the shooting and subsequent paralyzation of Jacob Black by the police. Now, in this case, the 3 defendants, Travis McMichael, 35, his father, Gregory McMichael, 65, and their neighbor, William Bryan, 52, face sentences of up to life in prison for the state crimes. The men have also been indicted on separate federal charges, including hate crimes and attempted kidnapping, and are expected to stand trial in February on these charges. And that's an end quote from the New York Times. So clearly we can see that the self-defense plea that the defense tried to replicate from the Rittenhouse trial in defense of vigilantes who took it upon themselves to deputize themselves, and one of their claims was that they were making a citizen's arrest, did not fly with this jury. Also clear is that the jury apparently recognized that the real issue in this case rested on the defense's supposition of prejudicial assumptions and white privilege, that the acts of murder by their vigilante clients were quote-unquote allowed as they committed a modern-day lynching. So the hypocritical acceptance of the self-defense plea by the jury in the Rittenhouse trial complicates the inherent dichotomous verdict in the Arbery trial, when self-defense was also claimed as justification that Travis McMichael and his father and this neighbor had legitimate cause to chase Arbery in February 2020 because they'd assumed he'd committed a crime and that they were making a citizen's arrest. Now, Travis McMichael claims he acted in self-defense when he accosted Arbery and, after a tussle over McMichael's gun, shot Arbery dead. Meanwhile, before I get into this, I just want to say that, there, in addition to the platonic issues I mentioned of money, and I'm going to go further with that in a minute, and control, we also have here the issue, especially now that the sun's in Sag and Mercury as well, of the courts and whether there is rot in the court system. Because what I'm trying to say is here are two cases that just coincidentally came to trial very close together. The verdicts came down very closely together. November 19th was the Rittenhouse. Today's the 24th of November. We have the Arbery. And they're two completely different. The defense was the same. Now the state laws are different. Okay, so I grant you that, and I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not trying to pretend to be one. But the point is that all the defendants claim self-defense, and in one case, Rittenhouse is being hailed by some as a hero, and in the other case, the jury saw through the self-defense claim because it was so obvious that it was not applicable, and that will cause a rift, because we're already set up to have a rift between left and right, conservative and liberal, or however you want to define it, in this country over many, many, many different issues. Now, meanwhile, I thought it extremely interesting that this past week also saw the jury selection in the trial of, and I don't know how to pronounce her name because I've heard it pronounced different ways, but Ghislaine Maxwell, accused of engaging in and perpetuating a sex trafficking ring in the service of the infamous pervert Jeffrey Epstein. Maxwell has also been accused of not only procuring, grooming, and paying underage girls to participate in sex acts for and with Epstein and his moneyed crew, many of whom have been named as wealthy elitist politicians, corporate moguls, celebrities, and or royalty, but of engaging in some of those sex acts with minors as well herself. Now, I'm mentioning this case because it highlights, again, another Pluto-ruled scorpionic theme, which is sex. Sex, power, and money, to be more precise, which make a potently evil combination depending on how they're used, as is pretty obvious in this case. Now, I saw a piece out of Reuters news service dated November 18th, so the day before the Taurus Full Moon lunar eclipse, about Maxwell's complaints about the conditions under which she's been incarcerated since her arrest. And this is a part of what the article says, according to Reuters, quote, "When Ghislaine Maxwell leaves Manhattan federal court at the end of each day for her upcoming sex abuse trial, the British socialite will return to a Brooklyn jail cell that she says is plagued by vermin and the scent of raw sewage. Since her July 2020 arrest on charges of grooming underage girls for now deceased financier Jeffrey Epstein to sexually abuse, Maxwell has been held in isolation at the Metropolitan Detention Center, a jail where, according to several defense attorneys, conditions are substandard." End quote. Vermin and raw sewage? Oh my God, you can't get more plutonic than that. And I go back to quoting the article, which continues, "Maxwell has said raw sewage seeped into her cell, that she has been given moldy food and deprived of water, and that guards shine flashlights at her at night," court filings show. Her attorney compared her cell to Hannibal Lecter's, a far cry from Maxwell's pre-arrest life of luxury. And for those who don't know, she is the daughter of what was his first name? Robert Maxwell, who was, a millionaire, billionaire guy. Maxwell cited the jail's conditions in 3 of her 4 bail requests, all of which were denied by U.S. District Judge Allison Nathan, who called Maxwell a flight risk. Those denials were twice upheld on appeal, end quote. So this made me look up Maxwell's chart, and she was born December 25th, 1961 at 3:20 p.m. in Maisons-Laffitte, France, Maisons, second word Leffitte, France. Her chart shows a wound to the Pluto archetype, which Pluto is at 10 degrees and 5 minutes of Virgo in her chart, and is opposed by wounded healer Chiron, which is at 2 degrees and 48 minutes of Pisces. This shows, as far as I'm concerned, that her karmic wound is related to a lack of boundaries in terms of absorbing the emotional energies of others, meaning she had difficulty establishing boundaries and was susceptible to the machinations of others. Similarly, this susceptibility related to two things: trust and sex, as in the inability to form a loyal, trusting bond with one sexual partner to the point where such an insecurity must have made her susceptible to the emotions, needs, and desires of others and coerced her into actions related to both sex and money. So, in other words, there's an empathic quality that allowed her, I think, to bond to Epstein, but not in a healthy way, because it was pretty messed up, right? If she had just had a one-on-one relationship with him, or if both partners were consensual about an open marriage or had menage a trois or whatever, to each his own, right? Whatever. There's no harm in that if everybody is in agreement. But she is clearly wounded in this area, and I think a lot of what she did may or may not have come from her inability to prevent herself from merging in that Piscean way with someone who was completely unhealthy in terms of his relationship to sex and his relationship to her. So don't get me wrong. I'm not painting this woman as a victim. Rather, I'm simply trying to illustrate how astrological insight can bring a deeper understanding to this particular soul's struggles, most likely through many lifetimes in the past, to develop the kind of confidence and security necessary to engage in trusting, loyal relationships that fulfill her need to heal whatever wounding occurred around these issues, both in past life karma and earlier in this lifetime. So the computer program Solar Fire describes this Chiron-Pluto opposition as follows. Quote, "You struggle with the darker side of life, feeling overcome by passions such as envy, greed, lust, and jealousy. You do not understand from where these thoughts emerge, but are aware that the more you try to push them to one side, the more they grow in magnitude. Your lesson is to delve into your past, recognize past feelings of rejection, and to transform your newfound understanding into positive outlets." I'd say there's still much soul growth necessary for Maxwell moving forward, which at this point in her development, since she's turning 60 in December, will occur after her jury verdict, meaning probably during her long jail sentence, or it will be dealt with on an ongoing basis in her future lifetimes. We come here to work on things, and we make certain areas of progress or lack thereof, and then we leave our earthly body behind and come back to, continue to learn either the same or other lessons that we are in need of learning as we move forward karmically. So back to this particular week, as the Sagittarius sun waxes toward its meetup with Mercury, which is exact on November 28th. Given that this is a holiday weekend here in the States, along with the nature of Jupiter-ruled Sagittarius, which is, as I said before, its expansion, particularly around law and travel. Clearly we have increased travel throughout the nation right now. We often do. This is often the beginning of the Sag period. And we've already heard several major announcements from some of these juries and prominent people like President Biden. Traditional astrology says the sun is the leader, the king, the president, the head of state, whatever. So these recent announcements coming as this Sun Mercury in Sag conjunction has been waxing to complete on November 28th. These announcements include that 92% of federal workers and military personnel have received at least one shot of the coronavirus vaccine to date as the government mandate sets in. There's a deadline. I don't know if it's today or tomorrow or whatever, but it's now or soon. 5% of these have asked for religious or medical exemptions, and 3% who are unvaccinated have not asked for an exemption. And this leads us to conclude that the expansive government mandate is working and having the desired effect of protecting both the government-related workforce and our military from contracting a more serious case of the virus. It will presumably also cut down on transmission, as vaccinated people may transmit the virus and they may get the virus, but if you're vaccinated, it's far, far less likely to cause hospitalization or death. And since the Sun-Mercury's conjunction is also about business, Mercury's about business as well as transportation, we see now the recent announcement that this past month's statistics show a drastic reduction in unemployment claims, and that unemployment has achieved record lows in this country. According to the Washington Post headline today, quote, weekly jobless claims plunged to 199,000, the lowest level in more than 50 years. The 71,000 slide marks the 8th straight week of declines, a reflection of a tight labor market that has companies scrambling to retain and expand their workforces. This marks the 8th straight week of declines and a pivotal shift, with claims now down well below pre-pandemic levels. In 2019, average weekly jobless claims hovered around 220,000. It's a stark contrast from this time last year when around 700,000 claims were filed. So we know also that the economy has begun to get back on track, that unions have been rallying over the past month or two or more for better conditions and higher wages with more success, and that goods have begun to move a bit more rapidly off the docks of major U.S. ports, especially since the federal government authorized the expansion of work hours from 40 per week to 24/7 round-the-clock service. President Biden announced this week that major retailers have partnered with the U.S. government to ensure that no shortages of holiday gifts and other products occur at their locations. He was talking about Walmart and Target and Costco and, Sam's and BJ's and all the other major retailers. Dare we attribute a lot of this good news to the sun's ingress into the great benefic Jupiter-ruled Sagittarius, and that much of it is economically and business related to Mercury and Sag as well? Well, personally, I think so. But the one disheartening thing or area, however, is how Sagittarius is often fond of overdoing a good thing. Not content with the necessary expansion, Jupiter-ruled Sag can bring too much of a good thing. Yes, I'm talking about inflation. So let's focus on the positive and work to eliminate the negative by realizing at the same time that it will take a while for an overheated economy, the result of spending wealth accumulated during the pandemic when physical shopping was limited as a result of shutdowns and restrictions, and as a result of expanded government stimulus monies, which put money in our pockets that, many of us couldn't spend, and the return of workers to production factories around the world, providing us the ability to once again buy these goods, and the speed up of the movement and transportation of such goods, Mercury and Sag, and the refusal by the oil cartel to increase oil production, that these have all contributed to inflationary forces that we now need to combat. So thanks, Jupiter. However, we may well see a lot of hyperbole and rhetoric. In fact, we already have, focused on inflation alone and disregarding the actual factual state of the economy. So let's keep our eye on the prize, recognize that the Federal Reserve has done a decent job of regulating the economy during the worst pandemic in a century, but that the fallout has been the dreaded inflation. And again, it will take time to reduce this, but all other economic signs bode well for a positive outcome down the road. So as we give thanks at our tables this weekend, tomorrow, or whenever you're listening to this, maybe it already happened, and try to avoid political conversations and discussions about conspiracy theories, and say instead, hey, let's talk about the weather. What kind of winter do you think we'll be having this year? May we all express gratitude for the people in our lives and celebrate that we are here now in the moment. We have survived. The past nearly 2 years have been ones of loss and sorrow for many, but we're still here. The Sag Sun reminds us that the sun will always come up tomorrow, and for that we may give thanks. All right, so thank you everyone for joining me today. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week, December 2nd, for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. I will be sure to get to one or two of the astrological happenings that I did not talk about, one of which is the station direct of Neptune, which will occur December 1st, so right before next week's show, and I will delve into that in more detail, along with, of course, the upcoming solar eclipse, the Sagittarius new moon, on December 3rd or 4th, depending on your time zone. So I will be obviously sure to cover those topics and more on next week's show. Until then, a very happy holiday for those who celebrate. Sunday night is also the first night of Hanukkah, so to all my Jewish friends, happy Hanukkah. To all my American friends, happy Thanksgiving. And till we meet again, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to go